Delivering consistent constructive feedback can be one of the best drivers of ensuring improvement in future performance. Just as even a top athlete is going to require the use of a coach to point out things that they cannot see and help structure and drive improvement, any one of us can benefit from this type of approach. In this episode, we're going to cover the purpose of feedback, outline the processes, the steps to be taken when delivering it, and then talk about the key principles to bear in mind to make sure that we keep it all in line in terms of being constructive, useful, positive. Feedback is all about improvement in the future. It only looks back to derive information, lessons, learning from things that have gone either well or poorly in the past to help improve future behavior. It's not looking back for either punishment or indeed necessarily reward. Public reward is a very different thing from individual private feedback. Feedback is always something that is conducted between two people in a safe environment where it's clear that the information is going to be contained so that people are free to speak their mind. A great first step in delivering feedback is to schedule it. Putting something on a schedule shows that it's valued. It's going to be important. And it also gives the other party a bit of a heads up. So you can say something along the lines of, hey, Jim, on Tuesday when we get together next week in the afternoon, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on the project that we just finished. I'm sure you've got some good insights into, what went well, what we can improve the next time. I'm really open to hearing what you've got to say on that. So this puts the other person at a bit of an advantage. They've got time to consider what's going on. It gives you time to collect information as well, so that you're not going to something cold where it's more likely to be a bit of an emotional reaction in the moment as to something that has just occurred. Scheduling something even for an hour or two's time from the event itself, again, gives a bit of space and distance so that perspective can be that much better. Asking the other party's opinion first is a really crucial step because it's given them the opportunity to outline all the facts, all the perspectives from their point of view. And you'll sometimes find that people are, in many cases, their own worst critics. And they can be much more harsh on themselves and their own performance than you might have ever been. And they'll see things perhaps that you haven't seen. And that is just going to give you a much better way to move into the conversation than you just launching in from the outset. So once the other party has given their feedback, their opinion on the situation, now it's your turn. But maybe it's not, because the next step, before you would just launch into giving your own feedback, is to ask permission to do so. And this can be an interesting scenario. So you're going to get one of two answers. Perhaps a yes, fine, go right ahead, or maybe a no. And the no in this case might well be a signal that, there's frankly not enough trust yet that's been built in this relationship for that person to feel comfortable taking feedback from you, especially if they're considering that what's coming down the line is going to be negative feedback. So it's important to establish and build that trust before you can impart constructive negative feedback. So if you've asked permission and they've declined, to then go ahead and launch straight into giving the feedback anyway has just further eroded that trust. And honestly, you would have been better off not having the conversation in the first place. If someone declines your offer of feedback, curiosity is going to be your very best friend in the situation. I remember once having lunch with a coworker and having offered feedback, it was declined. It was very early on in the relationship. And then that's fine. We moved on, talked about other things, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, in that mental battle between curiosity and, embarrassment or fear, embarrassment and fear lost out to curiosity, and the other party just blurted out, "Okay, tell me then," because just couldn't contain it any longer. It might also be useful just to give your personal stance and take on feedback along the lines of, for me, I find it's quite useful all through the year to give consistent feedback make steady improvements, as opposed to waiting till the end of the year for the annual review, where it's a massive corporate exercise and we do the feedback all in one thing, and then it often gets filed away in a drawer. Action plans may not be followed through, and it just doesn't deliver as much consistent performance development as simple ongoing feedback through the year does. If we remember that feedback is all about making improvements in future behavior, then it makes sense that the tone of voice that we're using to deliver it, whether it's positive, negative, mix of both, is going to be really similar whichever way it's going to be. So the past is only being used as a tool here to help improve the future. It's not going to be the grounds for berating someone or criticizing them in a really terrible way. That's not the point of feedback, and it's not going to work if you attempt it that way. So just keeping a plain neutral voice along the lines of, hey Allison, we discussed that thing, great, thanks for that. We've talked about ways that we can look to improve that the next time around. I'm sure you're going to be on top of that. So just let's make sure we make that happen the next time. Feedback that's given in a neutral, easy, pleasant tone of voice is much, much easier to take on board than something that is seen as really harsh and critical. It's also really helpful if we can keep things, in as much as possible, factual, supported by evidence, documentation. So, for instance, if I was to say something along the lines of, read your expenses. I was talking to Bill down in accounts recently, and he just let me know that the last 3 expense reports that you submitted were all late, and there were errors on 2 of those. Is that something we can look at to improve for next time by doing this, that, and the other? Is very different from saying, oh, hey, I just hear your expenses are late and they're not done very well. The one is much more inviting of counter argument, whereas having the clear, calm facts in front of you is just much more inviting of focus on improvement. One of the possible unintended consequences of positive feedback can be that the person who's receiving it feels, wonderful, I've done a great job, this is amazing, I really don't need to work any harder, I've got it all figured out, and I'll just sit on my laurels and cruise from here. In a really strong performer, that's not likely to happen, but that tendency can be there. So it's always really important, if we're giving positive feedback to someone, that there's also a message about keeping it up, or ways that we can even improve further. Use what we've done, what we've achieved as a stepping stone to move on to the next level and to the next step, and keep that ongoing positive progression as opposed to standing still where we are. So the but sandwich happens when someone is really needing to give negative feedback but doesn't seem to want to do it up front, and it goes something along the lines of this. I'm going to give you some fluffy, positive upfront feedback to make you feel comfortable, and then I'm going to drop the bomb on you with the negative feedback that I really want to talk about. And then, just so that there's not any, air of negativity in the air, I'm going to sprinkle in some, positive feedback, and you'll feel all better at the end of it. And people hate this. They can see that the but in the sentence is coming, and they tend to ignore everything that happened up until that, and they also tend to ignore the positive feedback that comes at the end of it. So it's much better to get the bad news out of the way first and not fall victim to the but sandwich. If you find yourself in a situation where you're having to give negative feedback to someone whose recent performance, attitude, behavior is really out of kilter with what you have normally come to expect from them, then there's a high possibility that there's something going on either at work or in their family background that's having an impact here. So rather than simply call it out in a brutal way of like, what's up with you? What's the matter with you? Just have a really private, pleasant conversation where, you're showing genuine concern along the lines of, hey, Bill, I noticed you missed the deadline on that project last week. I was really surprised because that just seems really unlike you. I just wanted to have a chat and just make sure that, everything is okay. And just see where that conversation goes. Now, they may not need to share or wish to share all the details of, what could be going on in their, divorce or, family illness or any of these type of things. But just being aware that this is the context that that behavior is happening under gives a completely different flavor to the situation. you may well encounter pushback after giving some feedback, particularly, negative feedback. So, there's a few things we can look at here. So for starts, you might have a very simple, yep, no problem, don't worry about it. Yep, that won't happen again, won't happen next time. Don't let that slide. Appreciate the sentiment that they're going to work hard to make sure that doesn't happen the next time. But this is the time to dig a little bit deeper into the details of, great, thanks. Tell me more. How are you going to ensure that that's not going to happen the next time? Let's make a plan. I can help you out with that. Get down to some, planning, some real, center of the issue rather than just letting it be glossed over, on the surface. Because if you don't, chances are it may well just happen the next time. You might find somebody who's in a little bit of denial. Oh no, actually, I thought that was amazing when, clearly it wasn't. And that's where driving back to, keeping things factual is really useful. It's quite easy to argue about opinions and vagaries, but if you've got documented information about exactly what the standard of expectation was, what actually happened, and the gap therein, then that's going to be harder for that person to just run away and hide from. And again, you don't need to be exposing this in a punitive way. It's just laying out the issue bare as it is, and not giving them a place to hide. You also may well find that as a supervisor or manager in this scenario, you are responsible. You are accountable for the actions, the performance, the behavior of the people that are on your team. So you've got a part to play in this as well. It may be the case that part of the reason why that project failed or didn't happen on time is down to your lack of instruction, your lack of clarity, your lack of keeping on top of things at the time, and definitely if so, and maybe if it's not so much so, don't be afraid to take responsibility for those things. Take overall responsibility. It's yours anyway. Share that, but also lay out for the person involved, like along with, oh hey, sorry, obviously I wasn't clear enough on giving you the instructions on that. I just laid out what we were going to do. That's the plan. Is everybody okay with that? And got resounding yes, but obviously it wasn't clear enough. So next time around, don't do that. Next time around, be very clear, be very methodical, step by step about the instructions that you're giving on the plan. Ask the people involved to tell that back to you just to confirm that you're all on the same page. Written documentation, follow-up, all of these things to seal all the little escape hatches that might pop up the next time around if someone is unclear. Maybe they genuinely were unclear. Maybe they're just using that as an excuse. So, own up, take responsibility, and just try to make sure for the two of you that, this negative behavior outcome just, doesn't happen again. So to summarize a feedback session, I would advise it's a good plan to sit down and just do a quick review of everything that was covered, look at areas of perhaps agreement or disagreement, any future plans that have been agreed and decided, things that need to be investigated further if that's relevant. Always having been asking for the other party for their feedback as to what they feel would be useful to do in the future, their plans, their ambitions. It's much easier to get this information, this agreement, this motivation coming from the other party as opposed to trying to shove something down their throat from your end. And then a quick confirmation follow-up, be it in an email with just a simple reminder of everything that was discussed. There should be no new information. The context, the tone of the email should not be any different from what had happened in the conversation, but just there as a reminder, as a documentation. Certainly if there are going to be specific steps and dates set in place for actions and progress in the future, that needs to be documented. It needs to be there to be able to be inspected, detected going ahead in the future. In summary, feedback is all about influencing future behavior for the better. In terms of process, first off, we want to schedule it. We want to ask the other person's opinion first, also ask permission before venturing to offer our own feedback. And then finally, summarizing, reviewing, documenting, and then tracking the future behavior after the feedback session. In terms of principles, obviously this needs to be a constructive exercise. We're going to explain the purpose of it up front, keep a neutral position, whether it is a positive or negative feedback, same tone of voice, data driven, and finally avoid the but sandwich.